Hey folks, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about explicit lines and implied lines. And we're going to focus on techniques for making implied lines to enhance your inking. So let's take a look at the example on the left. The example on the left, we're using outlines to describe the form. We have one continuous line on either side of this tree trunk to give us an idea of the form, and we're using lines inside to convey texture of this object. On the example on the right-hand side, we're not using one continuous line everywhere. We're basically using a series of lines, and we're varying the thickness of the lines to create a sense of a light source and texture through just this method of working. So this is known as an implied series of lines, and this is a more explicit set of lines here. And the advantage, and you can use both, it's not that one is bad and the other one's good. You can use both, but this just gives your inks a little bit more variety. And it also really enhances the overall look of your work because inking is not tracing. Inking is a craft in and of itself, and if it's done well, it can really do a great job of enhancing your work. So let's take a look and see how we can use implied lines. So the first thing we're going to talk about here, there's two concepts, and I'm using Kyle Webster's thick and thin inking brush. This is built in, it's under the wet media brushes in your brushes panel in Photoshop. If I were to just draw a line, I'm making this a very thin line, and if I were to make a copy of that line and move it somewhere out here, the amount of white space between these two lines simply makes those two lines look relatively light. Now, if I take the same line and duplicate it and move it in closer proximity to each other, this second set of lines looks darker compared to the first set of lines. So this is one important concept that we have to understand. The proximity of your lines can dictate how light or how dark they're perceived. Now, it's the same brush size, it's just that the brushes are placed, the strokes are placed closer, which is conveying this idea of a darker line. That's the first thing. The second is your brush size. So if I hit the B key, and if I use a light line here, and if I were to now increase the brush size by using the right bracket key, obviously this line that's thicker looks darker because there's more black. So these are two important concepts to understand when you're trying to use implied lines within your inks. So let's see how we can use that to our advantage here. I'll make a brand new layer and I'll just toggle off the other guys here. And let's just start off by doing something very simple. We're going to make our brush relatively thick. I'm using a 45 pixel size brush over here. And I'm just simply going to create a series of repeating lines that are going to be placed very close to each other, and they're somewhat thick, like so. That makes this side look much darker. On the opposite side, I'll draw a series of lines that are not connected, and I'm going to space those lines further apart. And as we start to move towards the left side of this drawing, we are going to slowly start to thicken the line. We're adding more pressure to our brush. And what this does is it automatically gives us a sense that, hey, this looks like some kind of a form. It looks like a tree trunk. And we are also getting this implied idea of light. There's a light source that's hitting this because this side appears to be lighter because there's more space between the lines. And the lines themselves are very thin compared to the opposite side where there's a thicker set of lines and the lines are placed significantly closer to each other. So that's a really important concept. And we can add to that concept by kind of drawing, instead of drawing a line to indicate grass, we'll just create a few blades and we'll start to move those blades further out and we'll start to thin them out. And you can right away see that there's an implied sense of a shadow that's being cast. And you can see that these grass blades appear to be more thicker than the grass blades that I have further out. So we're creating an implied line by just placing the grass as we're doing. We're inferring a surface where we haven't explicitly drawn a line. And this is something that I think that when beginning artists are working, they want to use lines for everything, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think if that's all you do, I think it's a little bit limiting in your approach. So give this a try, try to place some strands of grass really close to each other, and then place some further apart, and it kind of gives a more organic look to, say a field or, a grassy yard or what have you. We can apply this to something like bushes. We're going to go ahead and use that same brush. And these are just repeating blobs. And I'll start to thin that brush out as we start to get into lighter areas. And if you look at any kind of tree, bush or leaves on a tree or what have you, if you look at a canopy underneath a tree, you'll see that there are pockets of light that hit, and there are areas where, where it's more dark, but there's still some light hitting it. And there's areas that are light that have some darkness within it too. And that's something that will make your drawings look a little bit more, natural looking. So we've got something like this. And again, I'm kind of implying that form. All right, so now let's carry this over to something else. Let's say that we want to have a brick wall. Well, I'll make that brush thick, and I'll have a repeating pattern. Let's do something like this. They don't have to be perfect. And as I get further and further away, maybe if I want this wall to appear to be curved, notice that these lines are getting thinner. And so we're almost inferring this round form. And that's really, I haven't drawn a curved line, but through a series of thinner lines, it looks like we're getting some curvature there. So I can just fill this in. And now I've got some implied light source. I'll just go ahead and finish this out. So we're not connecting every single line. We're using the spacing of our lines and the thickness of our lines to provide that illusion of, light and dark, which is really, really neat. So that's something I'd like for you to practice. You can also do this with things like water. For example, if I have a running stream here, I can just draw a line here. This is a relatively thin line. And maybe the lines, maybe as the water is closest to the surface of land, it's somewhat thin. But as we start to get further away, it starts to get thicker. And again, these are just implied lines. There's some really great artists that you should check out that really do a great job with inking both explicit lines and implicit lines, or implied lines. And one of those artists is an artist named Alex Toth. And another artist is Chris Samney. And they both have very similar styles, but I think they do a great job of creating implied lines within their work. So we've got this little river here, and I'll make these somewhat thinner. And the reason why this works is your eye, when you look, you're always trying to find meaning. I've just put these individual marks and arranged them in a specific way, and your eyes are interpreting those marks as things like water or a brick object or a bush or a tree trunk. And that's the power, I think, of inking. So I'm going to cut this video short right here because I feel like this should give you a good start to play with this implied line approach. Let me know what you think of this. If you haven't done this before, give it a try and see how it feels. If you find value in this video, please consider giving it a like. If you haven't subscribed, I would gently urge you to subscribe because there's going to be much more content. And I'd like to go ahead and do another example here where I go from start to finish using implied and explicit lines. So if you want to see that, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. As always, my name is Krishna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.